I guess we're starting.
Boop-boop-be-doo-doo-doo.
Welcome back to Come and Brew It Radio, coming to you from Texas Brewing Inc. in Haltom City, Texas. You can find us on the web at txbrewing.com and be sure to follow us on Facebook and share with all your friends.
In this episode, we're going to cover some previous territory and revisit the basics of packaging and priming to fill in some listener requests. We know that many of you have questions about the best methods and especially how you might, and we stress might, be able to save something that didn't turn out as planned. Plus, we also hope to get into a new segment describing a few details about malts and the differences between some of what's available out there. Other than that, the usual shenanigans and arseholery that you all know and love us for.
Before we get started, be sure to check out our Patreon account to help us support the show. Every little bit counts, and if you visit patreon.com/comeandbrewitradio, we have a variety of options for you to help keep the show going, get involved, and improve it. Also, we'd like to thank John Detallo and Ross Hughes for their patronage.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I'm Greg.
Sweet.
I'm Mikey.
I'm Chris.
I'm Stubby.
Thanks for listening tonight.
So we're like running on a skeleton crew tonight.
Right.
Yeah, and I gotta leave soon.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Brandon's out of town.
Well,
Mikey's got
at
to
the
ditch
break.
soon to go
Well,
do
that's-
some homework.
No, he
So-
doesn't.
Yeah, I do, actually.
He's got to go to work
Because,
at
you know,
home.
class starts on Saturday. You know. You got to work tomorrow, dude.
I do.
So anyway, recent happenings.
Yeah, this was
Well-
going to be last week's episode, and then we all showed up, and we were having some issues with the internet around here, so
Yeah.
it turned out that we decided to spend our
It was a
time
big
talking
cluster
about the
F.
show, drinking some beers, and going to a fancy bar that Stubby suggested called the Poop Deck.
Very
That
fancy.
was,
Was it my suggestion?
I have still never been there.
It was so fancy that you were required to have sleeves on your shirt to enter. Says it on the sign at the door.
and did say that.
Wow.
Did it really?
Shirts must
Yes,
have
it
sleeves.
did. It also said no MC colors, cuts, or patronage shirts.
It was probably the smokiest bar I've been in a long time.
Yeah.
I didn't think they still let that happen in Fort Worth, but boy, I tell
Well,
you,
it's an old school bar, though.
it's
They'll
concentrated.
keep that there. Yeah.
Oh, I mean,
Yeah.
it's so bad that, you know, I'm sitting there and I'm like, yeah, I'd like a bourbon. And the lady behind me goes, what kind of bourbon do you want? It blows the smoke right in my face. Dude.
Yeah, Nate, I think, said that she was filling with the cigarette. in her
Yes.
hand.
with her hand, yeah.
She's a very talented lady.
Which, you know, Fort Worth is kind of unique, I guess, in the fact that we actually still allow smoking in bars. So it's up to the establishment. And I think there's absolutely like maybe 3 or 4 in the whole town that still allow smoking in
I
the
think
bar.
everybody that likes to smoke in a bar was there.
I think you're right.
Wearing
Yeah.
either overalls.
You know, as a smoker for years, it used to never bother me, and then now I come and go, I'm like, holy shit, man. That
even
is-
when I was a smoker, it bothered the hell out of me.
It's just, I felt like I walked out and I got in my Uber and I told the guy immediately, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was just in there and I probably staying in your car seat with something and I need to take a shower. So, you know. But yeah, it was fun. It's a good
Yeah,
time.
it's always fun to go back to the, you know, and actually what's really funny is since the last time we were there, actually the craft beer has actually made an appearance now.
Yeah, it has.
Because for years, the only thing they had is this big, like, you know, this big, like, you know, what do they call it? The damn big ass wheel that you steer a ship with.
Steering wheel.
Steering wheel. Is that what it's called?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it was called something else. Fancy for sailing. But anyway, they had one tap of, you know, Coors Yellow Belly, and that was it. You know, right in the middle of this steering wheel. But they actually had some Deep Ellum and some other stuff in there.
and
I
a whole
was
lot
kinda
of
surprised.
semi-professional karaoke going on.
Yes.
I tried to get Brandon and Stubby to sign up
Boy,
for it before
I'm
I
glad
left,
I
but
missed that.
they didn't do it.
Man,
Losers.
you had if you would have stayed there long enough, I might have. Yeah,
They took it elsewhere to.
because
Do that
I got a Bradley a bad Uber rating.
Nice. Well, see, then something good came of the night after all.
Well, the idea was we were supposed to go and do a lot of different planning for future episodes, but I think all we did was just do a lot of drinking.
I
There
think
was
that's
a
what
lot
we
of
do.
that. Yeah.
We do that with most meetings, I feel.
We did some planning.
Store meetings,
There was
shop
discussion.
meetings, homebrew club meetings. They're just drinking sessions.
It wasn't
Yeah,
quite like,
social drinking.
a like I would say a day job work lunch where you have to walk in and go, so about that thing that happened, okay, work's talk is done. Time to start drinking and eating, whatever, that kind of thing.
And we write this off on our taxes.
There you
Thank
go.
you.
But other recent happenings, though. We were
Avery.
talking about last week was Avery sold a minority stake. They call it minority stake to, what is it, Mahal San Miguel? I guess I
Yeah.
would say that. And it's they also own a 30% stake in Founders Brewing up in Michigan, which I didn't know that until I was looking into that. And that pretty much pushes them out of craft status at this point, according to the BA.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you got to think Avery, for years and years, leadership as far as like what they went out there making a craft, putting out those singles, not singles, but like almost one-off type of products and whatnot for so long that really usually make a craft brewery popular. And now they're starting to cut that stuff back, and they're
Hey,
going
you know,
down
that
specifics and.
That was a neat brewery to go to. I didn't do the tour, but before they had moved into their new facility that they're in, it was in a warehouse district, much like
That's where I
what we're
went
in.
to it, yeah.
And
Hole in the wall, dude.
yeah, so like it's obvious they had one warehouse, and then they expanded, so they got the warehouse next to them, and so
Yeah.
they've got lines running out of one out into the other.
Yep.
They've got tanks sitting outside. They've got holes cut in walls. It was a neat little brewery to go to, and it was a big little brewery back
Tasting
then.
room was small.
Yeah,
Man. I
and
remember that.
they're getting food from the restaurant, across the parking lot. So here comes the server over with your food. It was really neat.
Right. We were already getting Avery in Texas, and I go
Yeah.
down there, and I see that, and I was like, really? This is...
That's how they function.
Apparently now the new place
Yeah.
fits more of what you would probably assume with what they're putting out down here. But yeah, and it's
Yeah.
still great beer. It's, like usual, we can't argue against it. And at least it wasn't
Well, I
AB
remember-
InBev or something that they're partnering up with. So.
When was it? A couple
Have
of
you
years
ever tasted San Miguel? I'm just saying.
I haven't. I can't think of it. What is it? Cinco Estrellas?
It's a Spanish company. And they make
That's the only
That-
one I know of offhand.
But
San Miguel, the one we get here, is actually made in the Philippines.
Is it?
Yeah,
But,
that's the Filipino.
Yeah, but the San Miguel in Spain it's San Miguel, but it's not very tasty.
No.
Well, they'd killed off some of their long-standing big bottles,
Right.
Like within the
The last couple
year
of years,
or so.
they've been
They've been
cutting it
dwindling
back.
their styles down.
Some of the really good stuff too.
Yeah.
Like the Kaiser,
Mhm.
gone, things
Yeah.
like that. So
Yeah, I got some stories about that beer.
do you now?
I do. It's
yeah.
It was yeah. Never mind.
That's a great. It's a beer. It's a story-making beer, which is what
Yes.
sucks about it. When they take away. I don't know if they're going to keep going with some of the smaller bottle. Like I think they got rid of all the
Big stuff. Yeah.
the Beast beers or whatever they
Mhm.
want to call them.
Yeah,
I think
the
they're all
Beast
gone,
and,
right?
And
Mephistopheles and
the Reverend and Hog Heaven and all those. I think maybe.
Hog Heaven has changed to something else. They call it. I always thought of that as a barley wine. They call it more of an imperial red ale when I see it.
It
on
was
the
originally
shelf.
a barley wine.
Yeah,
Real sweet though.
yeah.
Was the Reverend the one with the Reverend with
The
the
quad, right?
shiny
Yeah.
glasses on the label?
I think so.
Maybe. Yeah, I know
Well,
it
it came in
stained glass something
750s,
or other.
yeah.
Yeah. Which a lot of them did, or their big stuff that's 17% alcohol
Mhm.
is the small bottle. They're still putting out things like Rumpkin and whatnot, but
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know where that's going to go, and because I imagine they're going to focus, as usually happens, on 6-packs and whatnot instead of larger formats and specialties. So.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, the brown ale, Ellie's brown ale, I think is spectacular. Their Christmas beer.
They make one of the few American Pilsners. I don't know if they're
Mhm.
Joe's.
It's like Joe's Pills or something like that.
Yeah.
It's pretty tasty actually.
They were really good beers.
Yeah,
I mean, so
they're not
they're
going to be bad beers.
they're not
after
considered craft beer, but that's just
Right.
That's really just a status thing by the BA.
Well, I mean,
it's
and think about this too. They're bought into that. Guess who else is bought into that?
yeah.
Yeah, and that's sickening.
And these are fantastic.
Oh my God, this is one of
You
my,
know,
no doubt, this is one of my favorite beers. I posted about it on my
gonna
Facebook.
show them.
Yeah, it's the Founder's Breakfast Stout. I love this beer. It's fantastic. Made it a few times, and I've gotten real close. It's a really well made beer. And that's the thing that we in this time of year for me is kind of dangerous because there's so many beers that I really like and they're high alcohol. This being one of them. It's what is this one? 9%?
Yeah, I think it's around that.
8.3.
8.3.
This one I've noticed go up and down. I think it's probably more
different every
even
year.
now. I think they've taken it back some.
But I like this one, and then they have the Big Bad Baptist by Epic. Well, and they have Son of the Baptist, and they're all those chocolate coffee beers I absolutely adore. So, but you can really get in trouble with those for sure.
Yes, you can.
Yummy.
Delicious.
But yeah, it sucks to know that, some of these companies are still, it's just happening. But the good thing is that hopefully some of your favorite beers are just going to be more prevalent and possibly cheaper. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Because it's still like what happened with Ballast Point. I still don't understand how Sculpin IPA and some of those other beers, it's like you're so proud of this damn shit because it is so freaking expensive on the shelf.
Yeah.
And it's like, this is Michigan to here, California to here. Not a huge difference. Come on. How does it cost $2-3 more than something else from another place that's just as good? So
Well, I got to tell you, so the other day I was picking up a few beers, that because we are really short supply of beer around here. Because it's just because this is our busy time of year. We hadn't any time to brew.
And the stuff that's been brewed, I haven't had time to keg.
Yeah, we've got a bunch of it in the.
Damn it, Mikey.
Yeah.
I'm trying.
But anyway, the funny thing is I was going through and I picked up a 6-pack of the number one beer in the nation this year. The what was it?
Bells.
The Bell's Two Hearted Ale, right?
Yeah. I like
And then I walked. I was like, man, it was like $14 for a 6-pack or something, or a 4-pack.
Jeez.
Greg.
And I was like, you know what? And then I walked by and I saw the raw dadgum, and I was like, I'm going to put this back. I want to pick that up because it's just as good, and it was a little cheaper.
Oh, it's so much better. So much better.
Anyway, shout out to RAR for their new IPA. It's fantastic. So if you haven't had that, make sure to pick some up.
shout out for, you don't see this one until more recently.
Yeah.
Rar's Angry Santa. Oh, wrong direction. There it is. The Spice London Ale.
I couldn't help but pick it up.
For a long time, this was only on tap in the brewery, pretty much, and a few
Or
select
Firkins,
bars. Yeah, Firkins and whatnot. It's finally out. But yeah, other than that, that's, I guess, the real industry news as far as that goes. But the other thing that we
the
have,
big industry news,
the real, true industry news that has nothing to do with purchases, buying, and selling, is the apparent widespread infection of what is the diastaticus?
Yeah, the diastaticus. Yeah.
And
that's
it's a sac yeast.
So if you guys haven't seen recently, there's a new lawsuit that Left Hand Brewing is bringing against White Labs because of an apparent diastaticus infection, which I haven't really seen any of the details on this. I'd be curious to see how they're going to prove this, unless they have unopened samples from White Labs.
White Labs, yeah.
That has it, and so they've been having some issues or some quality control issues at Left Hand for a while, and I think some of this goes back.
This is national.
A while
By the sound of it, yeah.
And so anyway, what they were having trouble with is their bottles were foaming, gushers.
Right.
So they were having some attenuation after the fact. And also, some spicy off flavors. So
basically, diastaticus is supposedly coming in with the packets of just standard sac yeast,
right.
American ale and whatnot. And it's, I guess it's going to be sitting around for a while and eventually breaking down some of the medium and long chain sugars.
Right.
And then making it more fermentable in the long term. It's not like necessarily a flavor-producing wild yeast like we would normally expect of any kind, but it is over the long term a slow-working
yeast.
Yeah, that's causing this extra attenuation.
Not necessarily quite a wild yeast, but It depends on the strain because all saisons are, I think, for the most part, if I remember correctly, are diastaticus. So, but it's one of those things. I don't know exactly. I haven't researched it enough to really know, but I know that we talked with Kevin a little bit, and he said that it's pretty widespread. It's not just left hand that's having some issues. So
there's a brewery locally, and that's all I can say, that switched from using a liquid yeast manufacturer to a dry yeast manufacturer because of concerns and exploding cans. So it's not just left hand. Apparently it's several other breweries that have chimed in and said, "Hey, we had that happen too."
Now, is the diastaticus? Is this more likely a wild yeast contamination, or is this like a mutation of a standard strain?
It's a contamination. But the problem is that it also produces some spiciness to it, so it can really throw an off flavor if you've got a beer that you don't want that in.
Okay.
But they also have, they're having some. What did you say? It can break down. Was it? It produces glucoamylase.
Yeah,
right?
And that's what's happening. It's definitely doing that, and that's where you're getting the bottle bombs from. So.
Right. So it's actually breaking down and busting some stuff after the fact. So. And this is not a knock, and there's no way and I wouldn't stop using labs by any mean because we've heard of this, but it is a concern. I know that at one point last year they were having some, a lot of people were complaining because they were saying that their Brett and, all of their funky stuff was actually infected with Saccharomyces, which is actually clean yeast. But when you're buying a pure pitch of Brett or Lacto or something like that, you don't want any Saccharomyces in it. So
pure statement.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that that is going on right now. But I think unless they actually have a pure pitch of this that's unopened, I don't know how the hell they're going to prove that it was their fault. Mm-hmm. But makes you think though, if somebody with that caliber of a brewery, if they're bringing a lawsuit, they'd have to have some indefutable evidence. I would think.
Right.
You'd think you would have gone through the entire brewery, the entire process, and taken samples and said, "Well, it's not in our brewery," and then open a pack of yeast and test it. Oh, look, it's in the yeast.
Right.
Okay. Well, did you check your lab? Okay, we checked the brewery. Did you check the lab? Maybe the lab's infected.
Mm-hmm. Right. That's the other thing.
But yeah, I mean, Stubby's right. This is not a small brewery going, well, we're losing money. Let's wing it and throw a lawsuit at somebody. This is
right.
They've got to
spend
have
a lot of money just to bring a lawsuit.
Right. So they've got to have some kind of evidence. I'd just love to see what their backbone they're standing on is.
Right. So this is something that I guess if you're interested in this kind of thing to find out what's happening, because I mean, if something were to come out of this, it's going to affect a major yeast supplier and a lot of breweries actually in the long run.
A lot of
breweries. If they win, they could possibly put them out of business.
Exactly. And I mean, that's a big deal. Yeah. So, and a lot of people love White Labs, so that's a big thing there. Anyway, we'll find out about that, I guess, in the long term. Who knows how long it's going to take to get anywhere with that.
I talked to Nick over at RAR about it a little bit today, and I think this is something that he would really like to come in and talk more about, because he said it's a really easy test to test for it. So if you're bringing in yeast, it's a real simple test to be able to test for it. So he said he would like to talk about it at some point, so maybe we'll have him bringing in.
Good.
We're looking forward to bringing him in anyway.
But he had other obligations like a bachelor party tonight. So I can't say that I blame him for not going to the bachelor party instead of this. But we'll probably only have half as many beers as him.
Maybe.
Yeah, we need him back in anyway.
Yeah, he's a hell of a deal. I know we got coming up next week. We've got Kevin Lane from Fermentus coming in, right?
No,
Not
and
weekend after.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
Week after next.
2 weeks.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think he'll be around for that one, unfortunately.
Yeah, he's got some new stuff to talk about. So
Yeah, that'll be good.
Okay.
other than that, we had other. I mean, I was going to ask about this was for last week, but you know how things went around here: Black Friday, Cyber Monday. Yeah, it looked like it was. So.
We did pretty good. I think so.
And then we also found out that one of our favorite Texas breweries
Is that
was
confirmed?
recently for
Yes,
sale.
yes,
apparently.
they're for sale.
Okay.
Pedernales.
Oh, they are for sale.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Stubby
you know-
said that he wanted to buy it, I think, just
Yeah,
to make
just
some
to-
of that
Dunkel Swartz.
Dunkelschwartz. So.
have y'all heard the price tag for it yet?
And we're going to brew it with some
$2 or
of that.
$3.
And we're gonna,
$2-3. All right. I think I got
I
that
just
on.
want to buy it just to see some of those 2-row hops. Inside
sorry, guys,
joke.
can't help
Mm.
it.
Inside
Man.
joke. Sorry.
Yeah.
Listen back. You'll.
Did you leave that in?
Oh, I think it's in there. Yeah.
The 2-row hops?
Yeah. It's all in there.
Is that kind of like cold brewing?
Frost brewing? Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Other than that,
there's
though-
there's a whole Facebook ad, I think, for them, right?
I don't know.
Or
about
where
that.
was
Really?
that?
That was on the Brewers.
Was that on the
What was that?
Guild.
was that on the
Can't really
guild
think what
or?
they call it. Yeah, the guild stuff. So.
Yeah.
Hey, you know what?
Yeah.
It's there to be had for somebody, and you could do something good with it. A place that's
Sure.
doing mostly tourism BS.
Honestly,
So-
I looked at the property online and pitched it to a friend of mine who's been looking at property in the Texas Hill Country. I'm like, so that family compound we've been talking about and how you want a brew pub because you know I brew beer? Come
There
on.
you go.
Right there.
Come on.
There were good beers there. Kind of sucks to see anybody go
Yeah.
out, but
Yeah.
They won a bunch of
Starters.
awards.
Yeah.
A bunch of GABF battles. So,
nice guys.
no, I just, here's the problem I see. And it's just getting more and crazier in the brewing industry. It's just like breweries left after right, are opening up, and I'm still seeing the market is so completely flooded that I'm still seeing people thinking that you can come in and do a production brewery, which I think it's going to be tough if that's what your plan is. I mean, I think you've got to have a brew pub type mentality at it
Yeah.
at this
Please,
point
Texans.
because, well, I'm just saying that I know guys that own big breweries right now, and they're having to go 3, 4, 5 states over just to keep up with their normal production level because there's so much competition now. So
Well, and it didn't sound like this was we're closing. It sounded more like, you know what, we own this place and we just want out. We're done with this industry. Was the way I read that
I wouldn't doubt
for
that
sale. It's
based
just
off
that,
our discussion with the owner.
he's
Well,
he
he seemed
comes
like
from
he,
the wine industry.
done
I mean,
Right.
It was not like
business venture. Yeah.
yeah.
it was. I did it. We made good beer, and I'm done. They want to keep the brand. They weren't just selling it as, they weren't piecing it out or anything. They
Mhm.
wanted to keep the brand. Like you could go in and buy the brand, and you
Keep
could
the
continue.
staff
You could
and everything,
continue to brew the beers that were already in place, and take it your own spin on it from there. But you were buying a brand, not necessarily
Equipment.
and
Yeah.
a building and everything. So
To start your own thing.
yeah, that's kind of interesting on that end.
Well, I was discussing this with someone today in the industry, and we were talking about it. And I think the only viable option or business plan at this point is a small type brewery that you're going to be selling and depending a lot of on-site consumption
Right.
and stuff like that, because you're just, and this is really in Dallas-Fort Worth. I mean, we've got 70 plus breweries right now, and I know there's at least 10 or 15, maybe 20 in planning to open probably this next year. So
Yeah.
it's going to even get more crazy. And I think unless you can sell stuff on site and sell a lot of it, you're going to have a hard time putting your stuff in the market. The competition is just ridiculous.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you're one of those people or you're thinking about that and you're, at least in Texas, anywhere around us, please think about being a brew pub. We already know people who started off as production. They're doing fine, and they're switching their license because of the difficulty of what's in front of them in the years to come. So
Well, we've had the guys from Luck, which is a craft kitchen and craft beer place
Right.
in Dallas. And when they opened, they had 50, 60 taps, and
It was all local.
it's all local stuff, and they still continue to have all local stuff. But when they opened, every brewery had 4 or 5 taps.
Right.
They're now to the point where
They can't even have one tap
yeah,
for every
they
brewery.
can't represent every brewery with a tap. So we don't have bars with 200-300 taps. We have bars with 100 taps, and you still got to represent all the other states. You know, there's all these big brands that are here, so you can't not represent those.
Well, and you know, it's a unique position here in Texas too, because I think we live in the best location ever for if you're a craft beer aficionado. We get some stuff from the Midwest. We get stuff from the West Coast. We get stuff from the East Coast. And it's just like we get really anything that I could possibly want.
When they change those laws, when they change the labeling laws, the labeling laws in Texas used to be stupid. And you had to say certain things on the label based on your alcohol percentage, not what the beer was. And when they got rid of that statute, that you could call your beer whatever it was, as long as you put the ABV on it, it opened the door, because you'd have one label for Texas and you'd have one label for the other 49 states. And now they only have to do one label, and that's expensive for a brewery. So when that changed, we had a huge influx of beer, and it's been great. There's so many beers that we never got, and these breweries never intended on coming here. But we can sell in Texas.
Now they can.
Hell yeah, we will.
It's a huge territory.
So
think about that. Also think about making food at your damn brew pub.
yeah,
Please.
Yes.
Real good
like
food.
good food.
Well,
Yes.
that's the thing with Texas now is, depending on your municipality, a lot of them you don't even have to have food. So I don't even think it has to be great food. Man, just have some food.
Just serve something.
Yeah,
something
it's
to
like-
absorb the alcohol.
You want them to
Please.
come in and sit at your seat to drink your beer, but you need to feed them something that's worth a shit.
Yeah. I mean, some of the
Please.
places even they just provide you with several menus of the local establishments. Say this place, and this place all deliver free here.
Even just some food trucks,
Yeah.
and there's tons of them around.
That
Oh
helps.
yeah, so many.
But again,
All my apartment sponsors food trucks every other week.
we can shout out to Cowtown again for that one, knowing that they're going to come up with barbecue soon. So
Man,
come
oh,
on.
yeah.
Yes.
I'm really looking forward to that.
Finally.
barbecue. I think I saw Doug was actually listening earlier. So
Is he?
yeah, he was.
Doug, you there?
But anyway, they definitely make some great stuff. So I'm really excited about those guys coming out. So anyway, we want to dive into our actual topic for tonight.
I guess so.
Packaging and priming revisited. It's something we've covered way back. It's been a while.
So it's time for us to talk about your package.
Yes. My package. Check it out.
Just don't talk
All right,
about
and
it.
now we're
Again,
done.
I know. I'm not like Johnny over here naked all the time.
Naked.
You know.
Naked.
Wait, are you saying
yeah.
should I have worn sweatpants for this?
Yes.
Everybody watch, because that's the rest of the show. Packages out.
Packages and sweatpants.
But yeah, I think the thing to think about, and we've had some questions about, just going over the kind of concepts of the packaging basics. What are you going to do with that beer once you've really worked it out and you've done everything you can to make the best beer, and it's in a fermenter and you've taken great care of it? Well, you want to turn out a good end product for anybody that's drinking it. So your options are basically bottling it and priming it in the bottle, or kegging it. I mean, that's really the two things that you have to focus on.
Right, and I think what you need to think about if you're to the point where you're kegging, but you can bottle, and I realize we move on to kegging, so we don't have to bottle.
Right.
But once you get there, you can keg, you can bottle.
Absolutely.
So you need to think about what's your end game.
Right.
Are you going for personal consumption? Are you going for
Competition.
competitions? That's a big
Gifts.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're going for gifts, and then once you figure that out, you also have to think about what style of beer
Right.
are you going with. Stubby's mentioned it multiple times. There's several of us that have mentioned it as well. There are certain beers that Stubby is always going to keg condition. There are certain beers that several of us are always going to keg condition, or bottle condition. Sorry, and then if you do want a keg condition, there's some extra steps you need to take to that particular keg, specifically the dip tubes. But that's something we'll talk about here in a minute. But there's considerations you have to start looking at as far as what's your end game.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. Because if you're talking about bottle conditioning, and like obviously we like to discuss a lot of the Belgian beers we think should be bottle conditioned to get the best out of them and let them age well. Something like that, though, you don't want to put that necessarily in just a standard beer bottle, a standard brown bottle. You don't want to do that. You want to put a thicker glass bottle. Something like that's going to be safe. So if you can cork and cage it even better, it's going to protect you.
But be mindful, you can't enter that corked and caged bottle into competition.
Yeah,
exactly. Unless you get you check the competition rules for the
some
sizing.
Some of them do it.
That kind of thing. But like for that concept, that's one thing. Now, you can also turn around and do natural conditioning in a keg. And you can also do the same conditioning, but with straight CO2 in a keg.
Mm-hmm.
It's not quite the same because of the living version of natural conditioning and what's going to turn out from that product. It's closer to being more like a big bottle in that,
right.
And then that you could possibly bottle off. It just depends in the long run.
And I would say too, if you are worried about your beer being overpressurized, I would say that your typical German beer bottles are a little thicker. Like, so if you get a German import, they're typically a little thicker bottles. And a lot of it is because most of them recycle their bottles, so
right.
They're a little heavier duty bottle than like an American bottle that you would throw away. So that's something to think about if you're actually doing a higher pressure volume on some of your Belgian
thicker
beers.
Glass on anything that you're looking for extra volumes over a standard carbonation, which I don't have that written here. I can't remember how many volumes it is. 2.5.
2.5, I believe.
I think so. Which typically for that, priming sugar, and then this is like talking about what Mikey mentioned earlier was what's your end goal for this. If you're going to competition with this and you want a naturally carbonated bottle, just make sure that you write notes and things on it about like the fact that it is naturally carbonated, because if they shake it up, that beer is full of everything from the bottom, all the true from carbonation. If you're giving that out as a gift, again, think about the fact that if it's not a standard beer drinker, they don't really know what's going on with a homebrew, and you give it to them, when they take that swig or they shake it up and they move it around, they're not going to like that beer.
Yeah.
They're like, what
or
the
they're
hell
going
is
to drink it
this?
straight out of the bottle.
Well, I'm gonna even back up for a second. I just talk about
It's going to be ugly.
The bottle itself. Most competitions only allow, per the rules, they're going to say a plain brown 12-ounce bottle. So
that's not a 12-ounce bottle.
That is a 12-ounce brown bottle.
That's a plain old white man.
It's a plain old white man right there on the screen.
It's a white bald head.
So you'll notice
taking it back.
This is just a plain old brown bottle. Looks like one of the ones we sell here at the store. And this, you can see the embossing. So over in years past, this bottle would be kicked out because of the embossing
on the bottle.
It says Founders Brewing Company. So a Sam Adams bottle is out.
Dogfish Head.
Dogfish, New Belgium. Now a lot of competitions have relaxed on that, and they'll allow a Founders bottle, they'll allow a Sam Adams bottle, because those are widely available bottles to a majority of the country. If you brought a 6-pack of some random German beer back that's got their embossing on the bottle, don't even try and enter that, because if Greg knows that Chris was in Germany and bottled some beer with this German brewery's bottles, Greg can't judge that beer anymore. Mm-hmm. And that's what they're looking for, is it's identifying factors on the bottles. And along that line, you can't do it in a Grolsch bottle. So flip-top bottles are out.
Yeah.
The only standard bottle that's usually allowed other than a 12-ounce is the 7-ounce clear bottles.
for mead.
For mead.
Yeah,
You
for
can
mead.
you can get away with that. So think about that. That's this other packaging consideration is to think about that when
Right.
you're
Definitely be thinking, and that's one of the things that for a long time, I think that's one thing that you have to think about if you are bottling, if you plan to do a competition, that is one thing to consider for sure. But I think from a standpoint, for me, we talked a lot about this in some other episodes, but if I'm going to bottle for competition, just buy new bottles.
Yes, please.
I mean, because just think about this. You're already spending $8 or $10, or some of them are as high as $12 to enter now. If you why take that chance of spending that kind of money and potentially have a funky bottle? You know, for example, if you're not 100%, sure about your cleaning and sanitizing, regiment, for sure, by all means, make sure to not recycle bottles when you're doing competition.
new bottles are clean. All they need
And they're
is
cheap,
a
too,
sanitation.
Compared
So-
to your time,
Well,
if you
they're
want to
cheap
put a
at
value
Texas
on your
Brewing,
time.
not so much everywhere.
They're
else.
dirt cheap here. Yeah, we sell them cheap.
And it's a value of your time, because washing bottles is a pain in the ass, and spending a lot of time cleaning 50, 60 bottles or more, especially if you have a few batches to try to do
Yeah.
at once, that's a lot. It's just, think about that with the cleanliness of it. Like a lot of home brewers, you don't want to jump to kegging it. You can't, things like that. If you're going to start giving it out, just make sure people know what's up with your bottles whenever you give it to them, and also make sure that they are stable before you give them to anyone else.
Yes.
Mhm.
I mean, typically what you're talking about is priming a bottle of corn sugar. Most of the time, it's going to be sold in some sort of form where it's either packaged for, say, a 5-gallon batch, or if you're a little short on that, that's something to consider. And there are multiple charts and calculators that you can find that tell you versus like the volume of wort and the gravity to how much sugar needs to go in it to get the proper amount of CO2 volumes
Also
per bottle.
varies depending on temperature as well.
Exactly. And but they're also like, you can just do sugar drops and things like that. It's really easy to get that straight right off
So-
the bat.
Here we sell a few different methods to prime your bottles. The easiest is the 5-ounce corn sugar.
Right.
We sell it's a 5-ounce priming sugar.
About an ounce
pack.
a gallon. Yeah.
It's about an ounce a gallon. We also sell carb drops. They look like, I like to think of them as lemon drop
Yep.
candies.
That's
Like
what
a
I
lemon
always
drop,
describe them
yeah.
as.
Without the lemon, and I have to force myself not to eat them like candy while I'm
Yes.
bottling because
Yes.
it's just sugar candy.
Ugh.
We also have what's called carbonation tablets.
Tabs. Yeah.
They look kind of like a short, squatty little pill, and I
Yeah.
believe it's
White.
3 for low carbonation, 4 for medium carbonation, and 5 for high carbonation. We sell corn sugar by the pound,
Yeah.
by 4 and 5 pound containers.
That's for if you have an outside of the normal size batch or
Right.
something, or maybe you're doing wine or mead or something that's a
Mhm.
different volume,
Some batches need a pound to
sure.
boil
Yeah.
anyway.
The other sugar sources that you can use dry malt extract.
Right.
You can use honey.
Mm-hmm.
You can
It's a
use,
hard read on that one.
Honey's a tough one.
Yeah.
You can use table sugar.
You also
those-
make simple syrups.
Simple syrups.
syrup, yeah.
These are your major sugar sources. Now, some of the drawbacks to all of those. Each one of these is going to have a drawback, and this is right now we're strictly talking bottle conditioning. The drawback to the priming sugar, you have to boil the priming sugar in about a cup and a half of water. You have to mix that into your batch, and then bottle from there. Well, just inherently, there are going to be differences in carbonation. You're going to have one bottle that's way carbonated, and somewhere in your 48 bottles, you're going to have one that has
Not
very little
carbonated
to
at all.
no carbonation at all. That's an inherent risk with priming sugar.
Right.
Adding sugar to a 5-gallon batch and hoping that it gets mixed in enough without oxidizing your batch, it's a risk you're going to have to take.
Well, that also applies to even the drops, because really what you're thinking about too is it's not always just about the sugar mix. You could put that beer into a whole bunch of bottles and then drop with all the sugar tabs. But the thing that you find out is that sometimes the yeast didn't get as much. Like, there's some bottles that might have had more yeast than the others, and then it was weaker, or you had some problem with that. This happens. I mean, shit happens.
I definitely
with bottling. Shit happens when you're doing priming sugar.
You shit in your bottle.
You need to count on shit happening. You need to count on it. So.
I would recommend, personally, from my own experiences, the carb drops are a better solution for carbing your beer in the bottle, because you are guaranteeing there is
proper amount of sugar.
There's at least a dosed amount of sugar.
Yeah.
Now, if you didn't get carbonation, you may have a bad bottle. You just didn't get yeast in there. There's any number of reasons why that didn't happen. When I started, we used honey, and the brew shop we used to go to sold little 8-ounce packets of honey. Problem with honey is we don't know the sugar content.
Right. Exactly.
At all. Honey's very unpredictable. Honey imparts its own flavor.
Yep.
But that's
it's
what
like,
we
hey, let
had
me get
back
some
then.
syrup out of here and just,
you might as well put maple syrup or something else. DME is going to have that same issue with inconsistent sugars.
Well, I don't know if it
bottles.
necessarily has inconsistent issues with sugar, but the problem is
getting in each bottle.
Well, my biggest problem with DME, and I've seen this presented a lot of times for bottle conditioning. Don't use DME. Here's the reason why. You're going to have enough trash in the bottom of your bottles. If you use DME, you're going to have all that protein and even all that much more shit in the bottom of your bottle. You're going to have double the amount of crap in the bottom of your bottles if you use DME. And I don't think you're going to get any better flavor for using that amount of stuff. But I think as a home brewer, one of the things that I look at is that's one of the things that we were talking. I was talking to a person in class this week in the intro to brewing class, and he was like, "What? You're going to have sediment in the bottom of your bottles?" And I'm like, it's really funny because since the beginning of beer making, in order to carbonate bottles, you did it by bottle conditioning. So you had you had a live beer going into the bottles, and you add a little bit of sugar to it, and that's what creates your carbonation, right? And then you had a little bit of you had a little bit of sediment in the bottom of all the yeast, right? Mm-hmm. Well, it's only in the probably the last 50 to 70 years that we haven't had yeast in the bottom of our damn beer bottles. But now when people see it and they see some sediment in the bottom of the bottles, they're like, "Ooh, that's kind of gross.
What's that? I don't want that.
That's nasty."
Well, so we have I've been holding off on this. Tim Gage asked on Facebook, how does cold crashing affect bottle conditioning? There's a way.
Don't do it. You need to repitch.
Yeah, you're going to have to repitch. And that's going to bring us into the next portion that we were going to talk about. Is on the advanced steps on bottle conditioning. Is let's say you have a beer, like a friend of ours does a giant imperial stout, and he ages it 2 years before he bottles it and then enters it into competition. Well, that beer is going to need to be repitched.
Yeah.
If you're cold crashing,
for natural carbonation.
If you're cold crashing and you're bottle conditioning, well, the whole point of cold crashing is knocking everything out of solution and leaving it behind. Well, that's going to knock out all that natural yeast that's in suspension.
The bulk of it. There will be some.
There's going to have some.
There will be some in there because there's been studies about that say a lot of people have luck still doing it. It's just a lot more of a slippery slope, let's just say, for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you may have a lot of bad luck with that one if you don't repitch. So
here at the shop, we have a yeast. It's called CBC1. You can also use a champagne yeast. It's now called Premier Blanc, I believe.
Yeah.
And these are yeasts that are still going to be able to do a very, very slight fermentation with no flavor contribution, but they're going to do that in the bottle. So you use that CBC1 yeast, you add it to your bottling bucket and your priming sugar, or you do your carb drops or carb tabs per bottle, and it's going to bring the right amount of yeast, in theory, over into the bottles, and it's just going to carbonate that priming sugar. And it's really nice because it acts a lot like the English yeast strains and the yeast strain like Sierra Nevada uses, and it's gonna leave a real compact, real
good dense,
a yeast cake on the bottom of your bottles that's not going to get roused easily when you pour.
The best, when you talk about that, the best description I've heard of it came from Westlake, actually, surprising. But, sorry, Matt's very good at brewing. I just like to say surprising. It's one of those things where the thought about something like CBC would be you can add it to your bottling bucket on that day, but the best concept of that was maybe when you know you're going to bottle a day or possibly two in advance, go ahead and add it to that fermenter. Let it soak in and be completely saturated and spread through solution. So when you move it, it's even more mixed in. It's alive. It's ready to go. All you're doing is adding the sugar. It's ready to jump in.
It's already in there creating some CO2 in the solution.
Let it be hydrated. Let it be happening. Just make sure that you have enough for the amount of beer you're talking about, and also make sure that that beer was done well in advance of everything you've done, because you could have fermented, say, an imperial stout and let it sit for 2 years. That doesn't mean that the yeast didn't crap out on you somewhere early in the process in year one or in month one before it was finished, and you set it to the side and you thought, oh, this is great, except for the fact that there were 8 to 10 gravity points that should have been eaten up and weren't. Well, that yeast is going in there with those 8 to 10, plus any sugar you add to it.
Right. And maybe you guys can answer this question, because I know for a fact that we've got a guy named Vince on Facebook asking this question now, is that he was saying that he dumped the sugar in for just to keg condition his beer. And I'm like, you need to use a little less sugar when you're keg conditioning, rather like if you do decide to do like a keg conditioning rather than actual forced carbonation, you need to use less sugar than what you would use to do a bottle condition. I don't remember the ratio. Do you remember that off
when
the
hand? When I did a keg condition with natural keg conditioning, I had pulled off a sanitized quart to do it for a Dampf beer. That's when I did it.
You actually did a
Yeah.
You did a Krausen.
Yeah, Krausen, basically. I mean, that's if you think about what that was, I was like, and
that's
it came
old
out perfect.
school, dude.
That came out perfect. A quart to the side, and it was perfectly
so
carbonated.
So you actually took out a quart of the wort, put it in the refrigerator, and then when it was ready, you just poured the wort back into the keg.
Right. Okay. And I mean, you could probably go, you didn't have to take that wort if you didn't want to. You could probably do something to the side, but that was what it was.
I'm just
saying,
for
body
like
and
a corn sugar, you normally use 5 ounces of, 5 ounces of corn sugar.
Right.
But I think you use less than that, maybe like 3 ounces for a keg condition. I'd actually have to look up the ratio, but I know it is less.
It is less, and I don't remember the ratio either.
The last time I did that as a playing with while still learning is I used 3 ounces instead of 5, and it turned out okay.
Okay. Well, there you go.
I've only done it with, I threw the remainder of a bag of carb drops in a keg, and I was like, what the hell? And it turned out really good, but it was kind of an accidental what the F kind of moment.
Mm-hmm. And this brings up another thing that kind of goes with conditioning in the keg, and this has been I think somewhat popular topic recently, is natural conditioning using something like a spunding valve, which, I mean, I don't know.
It's
basically a pressure regulator.
Okay.
If you're going to ferment in your keg, you have to have a pressure ready vessel for this. Typically, say you take a corny keg and you want to ferment in that, you can put the spunning valve on one of the say the gas posts, right? And you can set it to the right PSI that it lets off pressure.
So you can
At
set
the
it. You can
PSI.
set it to 7 psi, and it's going to hold 7 psi in the
Okay,
keg.
so
and
instead of-
it's going to release.
So
the
think about-
remainder.
Instead of the pressure of the airlock displacing the water,
Right.
it would be
So
Right.
you're-
different pressure.
Like, and you're letting off pressure as it goes. It's only CO2 in there. There's no oxygen present, which is obviously good for the beer, but it's also going to be in the body of the in the volume, more or
Okay.
less, coming back. Now, granted, you're talking about fermentation temperatures and whatnot. It's not going to hold as well by any means compared to cold, but the CO2's in there. It's all CO2. Spunning valve off and on as you go. It's supposed to be really good too, I think, for dry hopping and whatnot, because you're not getting any oxidation out of that after the fact. But it's one of those things. Apparently, it's I think it's sort of maybe equated to krausening. I don't know. It's,
Sort of,
because
yeah.
it's sort of like the natural conditioning without adding any sugar back in, without adding any more volume.
Well, and I think, Greg, this might be something that you might want to give a definition of krausening, because I think this is so far from anybody. Nobody does this anymore.
True.
Maybe explain.
And krausening can be defined as, like I said, I took off a quart of unfermented wort from the batch itself, and in a fermented or in a sanitized container, and just set it aside in the cooler. Like I very, very much sanitized jar, kept it set aside cool immediately. The other concept back in the day was, hey, we have this one batch going, it's fresh, like say a Hefeweizen, and you know how foamy and frothy and active those are. And then we just made another batch, so let's go in there with our trusty scoop and pour that in, a couple shots of that in there,
Right.
and that's your krausening too,
Yeah, basically what they're doing is they're using the sugar from the initial beer to carbonate.
And active yeast too. That's the other. There are two things to that, I think, that seem to fit that term. So,
well, and that's really a kind of an old technology. I don't think people really do that anymore. So.
no,
But
it works.
Play with.
It does work.
It works just fine.
It probably works better than normal, especially if you're pulling off of an old beer, pulling out some wort of actively fermenting wort.
Yeah.
But the thing is you have to be very accurate at that. You have to know at what stage and what sugar content is in the wort, and
That's a practice
I
thing.
mean, it really is, and I mean that's what they used to do in the old days. I mean, and that wouldn't. I don't think that would be really practical for the most part for a home brewer. Unless you are just going to capture.
Oh, good luck to get it out of like a glass carboy, even a plastic bucket. It's
Well, I'm just saying from a standpoint of if you just did,
I guess
Excuse
if
me, you
saved
did a
it
beer- you did a
directly out of the
beer.
mash tun.
and you
right.
when you're running it
Bottle
off,
kettle.
you put you took a growler quart and just ran off some sugar or your wort initially, and then put it back. Well, I think a lot of that probably have to depend on, how well it would work is what the gravity is. Because I mean, if you went in and you had 11% alcohol beer and then you put a quart of sugar back in, your wort back into it after the fact, that'd probably be too much sugar, right, to carbonate it. Then it would be maybe a 5%.
You would have to
alcohol
consider
beer.
your gravity, what the original wort was. The good part about that is that you're not adding anything that could thin or change the body in any way. It's going to be the actual wort that it was. It should stay about the same, right? But the bad thing is, how much of it did you need in the long run to get the right volume of carbonation? Volumes is a weird game, man. I mean, to get the exact thing that you're looking for.
Well, it's not just volumes; it's sugar concentration too. So, you know what I mean?
Right.
I mean,
We wouldn't suggest that as a way to do it because there are much easier ways to do it. Like
I think it's a fascinating thing to think about because they've been doing. That's the way they used to carbonate beers. They didn't use corn sugar.
There was no corn sugar and whatnot to have.
Yeah. I mean, it was just that was the way that they did it in the old days. So, I mean, it's kind of an intriguing. It's kind of an intriguing method. I mean,
it would
never
be
really
fun to
done
do a
it,
good
but
experiment with that.
It really would be.
Do a few and see what we can find about that, and especially active fermentations too, just to see what we can turn around and give you guys as a possible guidance. compared
for
to, say,
crossoning. Yeah.
the usual, well, here's a pre-measured amount of corn sugar, here's a pre-measured amount of a sugar cube, more or less, that kind of thing. Because, like, it's easy to say when you're kegging, just either one, cold crash it, get it in the keg, do all the best things you can, best practices to give a good clean beer in there, and set it to 15 psi or 30 psi for 2 days. As long as that beer was cold in the first place, you'll be ready to go. Okay, great. That's what sells kegging, is how fast and easy that is. Natural conditioning, well, make sure that you had the beer finished, make sure that you got the right amount of sugar in there. Make sure that if you get the chance to set it in a nice warm space to start it, or else things may not go well for you. There's a lot to go wrong in the whole process of that versus just saying, was the beer cold going in the keg? Did it go in a cooler? And did you have enough CO2 to get the job done? Those kind of things. Yeah. And then even still, that carbonation is not quite exactly the same as what you get out of the natural carb, or the same as it ages over time, which is the yeast.
Right. And you've heard me, if you listen to this podcast at all, you've heard me talk about this. But I'm a big proponent of bottle conditioning. And the reason being, honestly, I think you get a better quality beer, especially in a homebrew level. And the reason I say that is because I think you have less chances of oxidation. You allow your beer to mature properly, because you're not rushing it to stick it in the keg. It actually sets in the bottles for 3 weeks at room temperature. And for me, it's absolutely insane to do 10, 12. I mean, I would never keg a barley wine or a Belgian quad. And the reason being is I'm thinking, well, all I'm doing by kegging it and putting it in the cold is prolonging the aging process that these beers need to go through. And so, and the great thing about it is, if you have a beer like a barley wine or a Belgian quad or something like that, when you do bottle conditioning, you have less chance of oxidation that's going to ruin the beer later on. That you know what I mean? So it's kind of a catch-22. So you've got these beers that you really need to age for a long period of time in order to really, for the alcohol to mellow and mature. And then on top of that, well, if you're counter pressure bottle filling, or if you're kegging this stuff, if you're first and foremost, if you're kegging a barley wine or a keg or a quad, well, the problem is you're going to have you're going to be prolonging the aging process because you're keeping it cold. It's just, that's the whole reason you keep a beer or anything refrigerated, right? Is you're wanting to extend the life or the aging of any kind of food products or whatnot, right? So when I think I mean, and I look at it from this standpoint too. If it takes a long time to do a big high alcohol beer, well, also you're wasting your keg space, man. So I mean, I don't want to put a beer in a keg and it's going to sit there for 6 months before I start drinking it.
You got some patience.
Well, I'm just saying that when you're doing these kind of beers, I think that's really what. I mean, think about that. Though I just ran out of that quad and triple that I made 2 years ago.
Right.
And to me, that those were fantastic beers, and we just won something with that triple, which I thought was on its way out actually, in Houston at the Dixie Cup recently. So, I just it's funny because I just think that those beers age well better. Because they are bottle conditioned, because there's no oxidation problems that you're going to have with those beers.
Right.
Excuse me. And that's the same reason that Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, if you go and get that, they know they've got that down to an absolute science, because they know if they bottle condition that, they have no oxidation problems. That beer is going to have a lot longer shelf life than a normal typical beer that may have some oxygen in it. So
I think a lot what you say about that is, like, you continue to treat it like a living organism, which is what it is in the first place.
For sure.
You let it roll out and live its life and do its thing for all that time and age appropriately and whatnot. And that's something we should say about packaging too, is there's two sides of that. One, if you are letting something age in a bottle that you either naturally conditioned or kegged and then counter pressure filled or whatever else, it is going to change drastically, especially the keg version. Once you start just leaving it in a warm room, it's no longer in the cold. Expect that.
Yes,
know that that's going to
absolutely.
happen.
I've
That's going
encountered
to
this firsthand.
incredibly change what's going to happen to that beer. And sometimes you can use that in your favor, especially if you're trying to hurry something up, say for a competition. You're not heating the beer. That's a bad idea. But leaving it out in, say, room temperature or something is going to be different than the beer that sat in the fridge for a long period of time. That kind of stuff. And leaving something that's bottle conditioned out is going to change it the same way, but it's going to be a more beneficial version typically, right? I would say.
Yeah, I think so.
And then the other part about it is think about when you're kegging something, if you can take the utmost care of that beer going in, of reducing oxygen contact for everything that's happening, whatnot, you're going to still have a better product in the end when you do bottle it and you do take it out and let it sit at, say, room temperature or something else, if you can keep it cool, than you would have if you let things leak in here along the line somewhere. So there are different things that happen with when you're putting it in the package in the first place. So just think about, one, if it's alive, there's yeast there to help scavenge oxygen, If two, it was in a keg and you were just like splashing it around and whatnot, that's going to be a different beer than the one that was bottled with yeast.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, those are two major options as far as that goes.
Wanted to add one thing into this really because
Go ahead.
one thing I've noticed heavily with my little beers that I've done is that the ones that I've bottled, they will change over time in the bottles, whereas the ones in the keg will rapidly change. The IPA that I'll do in a keg will change in flavor over the course of 3 weeks, whereas the Hefeweizen and the smoke the Rausch beers and such will slowly change over time in a bottle.
Well, and I think here's I think what your experience there, and here's what I think you're experiencing, because you are putting it in the keg, you're drinking it more often, you're going over there and hitting it. You're going to notice a lot more change than what you are in the bottle. It's probably changing faster in the bottle than what it is in the keg.
Okay.
However, I would say that what you're experiencing though is you're noticing a day-to-day change because you're going over there and hitting the tap all the time. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas at a bottle, you may not be going over there, I'm going to drink a bottle today, I'm going to drink a bottle tomorrow. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So you may note, and here's the thing that I've noticed a lot about kegging beers is that even though you may go through secondary and stuff like that, it doesn't seem to matter. When you go in there and you start putting that beer into your keg, a lot of shit's going to still flock out. And that first 7 to 10 beers you're going to pour out of that, it's going to have shit in it.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden you're going to notice, wow, it got all clear. It's all nice and clear. And
Which is the best time to bottle.
Mm-hmm.
yeah, but I'm just saying that every one of you is kegged, and then next thing you know that the first 5 or 10 pints are just not as good as what it will be later on. And I think a lot
or
of that
at the
is,
end of it, the last 10.
Yeah, so I'm kind of intrigued by some of those was it the clear keg apparatus? I've never tried one of those, but I would kind of be curious to try one of those. And basically what is like a toilet float. And rather than pulling the beer from the bottom of the keg, it actually just floats on the top and sucks beer from the top. So
I remember that. Okay, yeah.
I've seen those. I've
seen
never
them
tried
around.
them.
Great
tried
idea. Yeah.
It's
Otherwise,
a great
you're
idea, but I
cutting
wonder.
your dip tube a lot, and
Yeah,
you're
but then
losing
you
a lot of
waste the
beer.
beer, yeah,
a
so.
lot of beer. So,
And really, you can give that crappy beer to people you don't like.
well, that is typically the usual answer for home brewers, because a lot of people don't know any better.
Yeah.
Do we want to take a break real quick, or where are we at?
It's up to you.
I don't know. I wasn't sure, because we
we're
still
right
need
at
to
an
talk
hour.
about one thing.
We're right at an hour,
We need to talk
so.
about fixing some beers before we move away from packaging, which is
Yeah.
it kind of goes back to the natural conditioning thing. So
Okay, cool.
Let's try and wrap that up before we get into the
All right.
malts.
I mean, because obviously this is a large territory to cover. You can go back to our previous episode where we also went through a lot of the same topics, and I know that there's probably some things we hit there that we didn't hit here, because it's a lot. And every time that
There
somebody
is.
comes into the store and we discuss any of this, you're
go
all over the
on.
place, and you can see in their eyes that like they're looking a little wild and just thinking, "What did you just pour on me, man? You know, you just laid so much shit down on top of me that I have to deal with." It's like it's a lot of information, and typically it just takes doing to see what you prefer the most. Like I don't naturally bottle condition that often, but I do
Right.
in order to get samples of things and to save aside. Like if I'm making a big beer of one kind with a whole bunch of additions, maybe I'll take that base beer and natural condition a few bottles to know what it tastes like compared to the end product, you know, that's going to be kegged, that kind of thing. But if you think about it, it all comes down, if you're getting down to the natural conditioning, which is what many of y'all are doing, there are going to be some issues that show up. And barring, you know, like let's say that you have enough yeast still in solution. The typical solution to fixing a flat beer, if you open a bottle, it's been sitting there for the proper amount of time, 3 weeks in a warm room. You know that you gave it the right amount of sugar. If you did, like say 5 ounces of corn sugar in your bottling bucket, possibly there was a mix problem or something like that. You never know. That could be something where you could come back around, take that exact bottle in a very clean situation, pop the top. There's no carbonation. Add a sugar tab of some kind, you know, typical sugar
The
drop.
carb drops.
Carb drop, a new clean cap, pop it on, let it sit again for another basically 2 to 3 weeks and see if that could change the carbonation. I would say instead of doing a whole batch, I don't know what's going on with Stubby in there. He's shivering and
Cinnamon.
I would say do like maybe a couple beers that
He likes that one.
if you had out of 50 to 55 beers, if most of them are popping up flat when you're trying to get these beers to go, I would say give it a few to try those first before you hit all of them to be sure, because if you aren't positive about those beers, you might have a bottle bomb if you overdo it for the ones
Right.
that did get all the
Absolutely.
sugar.
I think
That's you
that's
don't
the
want that.
recommendation I've made to several people who've come in.
Yeah, you
They've
don't
gone
want that.
3 weeks later, and I don't have any carbonation. I'm like, okay, leave the batch for 2 more weeks.
Yes.
And then try one more, and then try one more a week for
Take
up
it-
to like 2 months.
Take it
These
up
you might
into
have a
another
slow.
room that's warmer.
Yeah.
And where was it? Where has it been sitting? Was it in a cool room? I mean, what time of the year was this happening? Put it on top of your refrigerator. Put it in your laundry room where the dryer is. Not on top of the dryer, but
Yeah,
in
because
the
that'll-
room where it's
that'll end
warm.
terribly.
You know, things like that can make a huge difference because maybe there's just something not working, and then suddenly it does work. It just took a lot longer than you expected it to, because they typically say 2 to 3 weeks. That's a guideline, man. Yeah,
More
it's
like
just a
guideline.
It's a living organism again. Just you're dealing
Well-
with something. Make it happy, and it does what it needs to do.
That's why I always
So-
tell people, you know, designate some sacrificial bottles, as I used to call them. You know,
Definitely.
pull a bottle after week 1.
Mhm.
Hell, you could have perfect carbonation after
You
week
should
1.
test, yeah.
Pull a bottle after week 2. Oh man, it's still not carbonated. Pull one at 3 weeks.
Right.
Oh, it's perfect. Okay, put the whole batch in the fridge.
Right.
You know, oh, it's still undercarbonated. Give it another week.
Right.
Oh, it's a little overcarbonated. We'll put them all in the fridge. Definitely.
Yes. Stop
Um,
it at that point. You know.
It's- Yeah,
I definitely had a batch that entirely overcarbonated, and it was awful. I got like 2 ounces out of every bottle.
It happens. Bottle bombs happen.
And that's something to think about too. Is like the cold will stop that.
Yeah.
And you want to stop that in advance, but you also don't want to add sugar to all the bottles and end up with all of it. Plus, think about the fact that if the bottles have sat warm, like room temperature warm, they're not absorbing the carbonation the way they should. So maybe you open it and you get some carbonation. There's a difference between the room temperature one that's never been in the fridge and the one that you
Yeah.
carbonated and put in the fridge and then open.
That's
So
a-
make sure that
Absolutely.
you definitely give it the time, then give it a
Exactly.
couple of days in the good cold fridge to let it absorb the CO2.
That's a good point, Greg, that you made there. Is a lot of people don't realize this, that you have to have your beer cold in order for CO2 to become soluble in liquid. So
Especially if you have any room in that neck.
So yeah, so you got headspace in there. Well, you're gonna pop that thing and it's gonna go. Psh. Well, it's because all that CO2 is in the head pressure. Mm-hmm. Well, if you don't put that in the cold, that head pressure is not going to dissolve into solution. So that's a very good point that a lot of people don't realize. This because I have that question asked a lot. Is a lot of people ask me, "Oh, I want to start a keg. I want to do a keg. Do I need to have it refrigerated?" And I'm like, "Yes."
Yeah.
In order for if you want to keg condition pressurize it and
force carb it.
Dude, there's the word I was looking for. You have to have it under pressure in the cold. So
don't take for it will absorb a little bit. There's going to be something in there. It just happens, but nothing near what you're looking for. That's pretty much the goal. Like the top of that bottle is holding a whole lot of CO2 that is not in solution, but when it gets cold, it will absorb it, and that's really the whole point of that, you know.
And the same thing, even though when you if you're serving your beer at a party or something like that, well, your beers are warm, they're going to foam and they're going to taste flat. So
they go in a warm cup and a warm line.
Yeah,
all your CO2 is just blasting right out of there.
Right. Well, and you hear me bitch about this all the time. I think a growler is a shitty format for beer, and that's the number one reason why.
Yep.
Is because, okay, well, I'm going to pour you a beer. The first one might be okay, and then it sits on the table for a while. That's warming up, and then the CO2 is coming out of solution.
The next time you open it to pour the next one,
CO2 is, and then by the halfway point, some bitch is flat. You know,
you're pouring an English beer at the end of it, no matter what it is. So, it's like about almost room temperature and no carbonation. So.
Right.
Which Nigel over here would be like, hell yeah.
I'm not a proponent of growlers.
Something you'd say it quite like that.
I mean, I think it's a great way to just, hey, I'm going to take my beer to a party or something like that. But if you really want to impress people, I think that's
bring bottles.
Bring bottles.
Just bring bottles.
Or bring your
put them in a little cooler,
man.
Think about a smaller version so that, like, okay, when you see a growler anyway, a lot of times they're the big half-gallon or whatever. Mm-hmm. Don't get that one.
Yeah, get the 32 ounces.
Yeah, get the small growlers.
Awesome.
Those are perfect. That's like 2.5 beers, man.
Yeah.
You open enough to pour for you and the next person, then you open another one and pour for the next people that it's never been open. It's been cold the whole time. So
I
think beer should be cold when you serve it.
Yeah, I think and I think from a home brewing standpoint, for me, I learned this a long time ago. Is those little growlettes? What are they? 32 ounces?
Yeah, 32 is a small one.
32, man, that is perfect to take unless you're planning on serving a bunch. Because I guarantee you, those 64 ounces, it's very rare that I serve all of that beer, even at a party.
I waste so much in those big ones.
Or you have to drink it all when you get home, and don't want to.
I don't. I grab a growler 3 weeks later and go, ooh, that's gross.
They're like they're half a gallon. So you think about it. If you take that and you fill it up a half gallon, and you only drink 3 or 4 beers out of it, well, I mean, you're wasting almost a fifth of your batch, or what does that be? A tenth of your batch.
Wasting way more than I want to waste.
Yeah. So it's kind of like, and especially when I go to beer tastings and stuff, there's so much beer. Not that your beer is not good. It's just there's so much there. People want to try other things. So I think that's a great format if you're going to take a growler. Just take a small one.
Right. Mm-hmm. The only solution to that, and this goes back to the same talk that we had about natural conditioning, is there's been a couple of times that people gave me they did naturally conditioned growlers just to test something that was coming out of a batch.
It's not good.
It's not a good idea, but it did work, and it did taste good even later.
That time.
That time. It's definitely
those growlers are not meant to be natural carbonated in.
No.
They're pretty thin for what I mean.
They'll hold pressure. They won't take pressure.
Right.
Yeah, because it has to do with. I mean, I would say they may be about the thickness of maybe a beer bottle, maybe a little thicker.
Yeah.
But
that's a lot more volume.
That's a lot of volume, and you look at pounds per square inch. Those things are not meant to be bottle conditioned in,
Right.
and they will explode and they will hurt you.
It's
So.
kind of like the ones where like they sell a lot of stuff now that's for pressurizing to serve out of it. You need the right canister for that.
And those,
you know?
yeah, those are all stainless. You know,
So think
they're
again. This
well
goes
made.
back to the beginning of what we said. Make sure that you have the
It'll-
right vessel to
supposedly.
actually do any packaging in the
Exactly.
first place, or else you might not only hurt yourself or lose all your beer. You might be hurting someone else, and
in the process, yeah.
But
Yeah.
All right. So let's take a quick break. For you guys listening on Facebook and YouTube, just hang out. We'll be back here in about 10 minutes, and we're going to cover the malt. We're going to cover some malts, I guess.
Malts.
Yeah.
Malts.
Malts.
Okay.
Malts.
we're going to cover Chris and malt.
Sweet.
Weird.
Now Mikey
Okay.
he doesn't want to leave.
No,
so.
no, definitely got to go. Definitely.
All right,
That's not what
guys.
your smile
We'll
says,
be
sir.
right back.